بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to lesson 5, lecture 5 in our series on usool tafsir. In today's session, I'll try to deal with the qualifications of a mufassir and the methodology of tafsir. Now, Imam al-Qurtubi, at the beginning of his tafsir, he starts out talking about the qualifications, or the etiquette rather, of a person who has memorized the Qur'an. And of course, down through Islamic history, the people who have been mufassirs, commentators on the Qur'an, they've all been haafiz, memorizers of the entire Qur'an. And so this is kind of a prelude, which is not our main topic, but we'll go through it very quickly. He said one who memorizes the Qur'an should first of all purify his intention. So that's the first qualification, or the first etiquette. Then he should discipline himself to recite the Qur'an day and night, because if he doesn't pay attention to it all the time, it'll get away from him. He should be engaged in the praise of Allah, the dhikr. And he should be mindful of death and prepare himself for it. He should be fearful about his sins and hopeful about his Lord's forgiveness. And the details of that, there's a breakdown on that. We won't get into that. It befits him to be knowledgeable about the people of his era. And then what exactly he means by that, but it seems to indicate from the context, he's talking about what to be aware of or what to be cautious of regarding the people of his era, because then he goes on to say to be on guard and aloof from his ruler, actively striving to save his soul. And then he quotes Ibn Mas'ud, which is a really interesting quote. Ibn Mas'ud said, "It befits the memorizer of the Qur'an to be known by his night when people are sleeping, and by his day when people are awake, and by his weeping when people are laughing, and by his silence when people are yakhudun." I mean, it means discussing, but it has a real subtle negative connotation. It's always used in the Qur'an in a negative way. People who are talking about serious matters without the proper gravitas, who take things lightly and just feel they can spout about anything. So it has that connotation. And he should be known by his humility when people are prideful, and by his sorrow when people are making merry. And then another great Sahabi, Abdullah bin Amr, he said, "It doesn't befit the carrier of the Qur'an to wade in with those who wade." It's another way of translating yakhudun. Nor to act ignorant with those who act ignorant. Rather, he should forgive and pardon, due to the right of the Qur'an, for the word of Allah is in his breast. And it befits him to be extra cautious about avoiding the paths of doubtful matters. He should, we're going back to Qurtubi, he should reduce his laughing and his speech in the gatherings of Qur'an and all other gatherings where there is no benefit in it. He should be with those from whom evil is not to be expected, and from whom good is hoped. He should not listen to people who speak badly of others. And then he starts talking about knowledge. He says it befits him to learn the rules of the Qur'an so that he understands what Allah intends and what he has made obligatory upon him. And so he will benefit from what he reads and act upon what he recites. And then he talks about, someone who's memorized the Qur'an and it's unbefitting that he doesn't know what it means, which of course, you have this phenomenon that so many people throughout the Muslim world, they're not Arabs, and so they've memorized the whole Qur'an, but they're not really sure what it is that they're reciting. So, but to give them credit, I mean, when I was in Medina in the language program, for sure, the people who did best, people who really couldn't speak any Arabic at all, but you put them in the language program, the people who picked it up the quickest were people who had memorized the Qur'an, because the patterns of the language were there in their minds. It befits him to know the Meccan revelations from the Medinan, so that he can distinguish between Allah's address to his servants at the beginning of Islam from his address to them at the end. And he talks about the relevance of that to abrogation. And he says it's a part of his completion that he know the i'rab of the Qur'an. I'rab is talking about the syntax, the final vowels that come. It's usually the final vowel on words that indicate their role, their grammatical role in the sentence. And he should know the meaning of its uncommon words, for that will facilitate his understanding of what he reads and dispel his uncertainty regarding it. And then he quotes Tabari, who quoted a hadith scholar named al-Jarmi. He says, for 30 years I've been giving fatwa to the people on the basis of the kitab of Sibawayh. And somebody explained that because he was a scholar of hadith, that when he mastered Sibawayh's book of grammar, he developed a deep understanding of the meanings of the hadith. For analysis and explanation can be learned from Sibawayh's book. After that, one should study the authentic related Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, from which the student can arrive at an understanding of the intent of Allah in his book, for the Sunnah will open its rules wide open for him. Okay, now Az-Zarqani in Manahil al-Irfan, he talked about the qualifications, starting with knowledge, qualification required of a mufassir, and it starts with the Arabic language. You have to know the meanings of words, and he singled out for particular mention the huruf, the particles. When you look at a book like Ibn Hisham's book on his commentary on the al-fiqh of Ibn Malik, Awdah al-Masalik, al-fiqh Ibn Malik, he's got a whole section in there about the meanings of huruf, and the lam, I think, is the most extensive. It's something like 18 meanings, and the ba is right up there with it, something like 15. And so that has implications for so many verses, because the huruf are always present in most sentences. For instance, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها النبي إذا طلقتم النساء فطلقوهن لعدتهن. So the lam there, لعدتهن, was used. What exactly does that lam mean? The translation that I copied here, O Prophet, when you, meaning men, put away women, put them away for their legal period. In other words, divorce, when you divorce women, put them away for their legal period. So he translates it there as for, and reckon the period. So, in the disputes about what the qurb, does it mean the period between the menses, or does it mean the menses itself? This verse and the lam was used as evidence for one of the positions. And the ba in the verse on wudu, famsahu bi ru'usikum, the ba there, what exactly does that ba mean? Now, one of the points that modern scholars have cautioned about is that the meaning of words has changed over time. So a mufassir has to be sensitive to the meanings of the words at the time of the revelation. And a classic example of somebody who's interpreted something which is beyond what it really can hold is, people are looking for miraculous signs, the scientific miracles in the Qur'an. There's a verse, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لا يعزب عنه مثقال ذرة في السماوات ولا في الأرض ولا أصغر من ذلك ولا أكبر إلا في كتاب مبين. It's in Surah Saba, verse 3. Okay, one of the translations that you'll see, not an atom's weight, or less than that, or greater, escapes him in the heavens or in the earth, but that it is in a clear record. But it is in a clear record. In other words, nothing escapes Allah. And so the term there is that was translated as atom is dhurra. And so some people said, this is an indication of knowledge about subatomic particles, because it mentions after the dhurra, it mentions what is smaller than that. But, dhurra is a term that was applied to atom when atomic theory was developed in the 19th century, and that reached the Arabs. And so they used the word dhurra, which was the smallest thing that the Arabs could experience with their senses, which was a dust mote. These pieces of dust that float in the air, and when they float into a sunbeam, you can see them. That's a dhurra. And so its meaning at the time of the revelation was a dust particle. And it's also used for these really, really, really tiny ants. So then to say that, well, the Quran was talking about subatomic particles, it's a bit of a stretch. And then with regard to the meanings of words, you have to really cross-reference. There are particular terms that keep cropping up in the Quran, and sometimes they'll mean one thing, and sometimes they'll mean another, and it can be very confusing, and one could conceivably misinterpret the word in a given context based on your understanding of it in another context. So that one has to be careful about that. So examples of words like that are muhsan, which talking about a woman who is protected or guarded in some way from loose interaction with men. And so sometimes it refers to a free woman because she is under the scrutiny and the protection of her family in a way that a slave woman would not be. And it also refers to marriage. A person who is married becomes muhsan. And the term fisq, the term muhsan, you see it in Surah An-Nisa, verse, I think it's 25. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ مِنْكُمْ قَوْلًا أَنْ يَنْكِحَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ فَمِمَّا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ مِنْ فَتَيَاتِكُمُ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. This is talking about those who are unable to afford marrying al-muhsanat from the mu'minat. This refers to free women. So they may marry slave women. And then it goes on to say, فَانْكِحُوهُنَّ, this is talking about the slave women. فَانْكِحُوهُنَّ بِإِذْنِ أَهْلِهِنَّ. This is where a man marries a slave belonging to somebody else. وَآتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ مُحْسِنِينَ. Here, muhsin is talking about the man now. I'm sorry. وَآتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ مُحْصَنَاتٍ. Here, the slave woman has become muhsanat. The slave women have become muhsanat because of the marriage. غَيْرَ مُسَافِحَات. They're not just girlfriends, engaging in intercourse outside of marriage. And then فَإِذَا أُحْصِنَّ, if the slave woman becomes muhsan, فإن أتينا بفاحشة فعليهن النصف ما على المحصنات. Then they get, if they marry and they should happen to commit adultery, then they get half of what a muhsan woman, meaning a free woman, gets of punishment. So it's going back to a free, unmarried woman. So the term muhsan there, it keeps flipping back and forth. And then the term fisq, it's used sometimes to mean habitual disobedience, and sometimes in the Quran it's used to refer to kufr, or the people who are fasiq. The munafiqeen are referred to as being fasiqs, and the kuffar are referred to from time to time as being fasiq. And so that can get really confusing. And then the term hidayah, sometimes it's used to refer to what's called hidayatul irshad, when Allah says that we gave guidance to the Thamud, but then it says, but they preferred blindness to the guidance. So that's hidayatul irshad. It's guidance in the form of general guidance. They had a choice of accepting it or not, and they chose not to. Whereas guidance is used in other places to refer to hidayat tawfiq, which means that Allah actually, instead of just giving you instructions about how to go somewhere, this is a metaphor or an analogy that if somebody asks you for directions and you tell them, okay, you go such and such a place, then you've given them guidance in that sense. But that's different from saying, okay, follow me. And let's say you're driving and they're driving ahead of you, and they go and go and go until you reach the spot, and then they keep going, and they've gotten you to where you asked to go. So that's called hidayat tawfiq. So these are, variant connotations of all these words, and so one has to be cautious. You once upon a time you looked up a word in the Arabic English dictionary, and so now whenever you come across that word in any context, that you apply that one meaning that's jumped out at you when you looked at the dictionary. So obviously that's not going to work.